There is a quiet revolution tucked inside the Sermon on the Mount. It does not arrive with trumpets or the thunder of marching armies. It comes instead like a gentle whisper spoken on a hillside in Galilee.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land.
In a world that worships power and prizes aggression, these words land like a stone dropped into still water. They ripple outward, disturbing everything we thought we knew about strength, success, and what it means to prevail. For the wisdom of the age tells us that the bold inherit the earth, the ruthless, the cunning, those willing to claw their way to the top at any cost. Yet here stands the Son of God, overturning the table of worldly values with a single breathtaking declaration. It is not the mighty who shall triumph, but the meek. Let us be clear at the outset. Meekness is not weakness. The two words may rhyme, but they inhabit entirely different worlds. Weakness is inability to act. Meekness is the choice not to, even when you possess the full capacity to do so. It is strength held in reserve, power governed by principle, fire contained but never extinguished. If weakness is a candle that has been snuffed out, meekness is a furnace with a steady hand on the valve. Consider the ancient Greek word pros, which the gospel writers chose to describe this quality. In classical usage, it described a wild stallion that had been broken, not destroyed, but trained so that its impressive power could be directed with precision. The horse lost none of its strength, but it gained something far greater, the ability to channel that strength with discipline and purpose. That is the essence of meekness, not the absence of power, but power under the reins of love. This distinction matters because we live in a culture that mistakes loudness for authority and aggression for ambition. We are told that to succeed, we must dominate, that the clenched fist is mightier than the open hand, and that those who turn the other cheek are merely inviting a second blow. The Third Beatitude dismantles this lie with the quiet force of a truth that has outlasted every empire built on violence. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, but no less instructive for that, about Joe Louis, the legendary heavyweight champion of the world. One afternoon, Louis boarded a city bus and made his way to a seat at the back. 3 white men, not recognizing the man whose fists had toppled giants in the ring, began to mock him openly. Now, here was a man who could have silenced his tormentors with a single blow, a man whose very livelihood was the precise and devastating application of physical force. Yet Louis did not clench his fists. He did not raise his voice. He sat meekly in dignified silence, absorbing the jeers the way a stone absorbs the rain without being moved. Only as he rose to leave the bus did he pause. He turned, reached into his pocket, and handed a small card to the loudest of his mockers. Then he stepped off the bus and disappeared into the street. The other 2 passengers huddled around their friend, craning to read the card. It bore just 3 words: Joe Louis, boxer. One can only imagine the silence that followed, the sudden realization that the man they had mocked could have broken them in half had he chosen, but instead he offered nothing more than his name. That is meekness, not the absence of power, but the decision to lay it down. If we seek the supreme exemplar of meekness, we need look no further than Jesus, who told his followers,
Learn from me, for I am meek and lowly of heart.
Matthew 11:29. His entire earthly ministry was a master class in controlled strength, an unbroken thread of power exercised with restraint. When the crowds of his own hometown seized him and dragged him to the brow of a hill, intending to cast him down, he did not summon legions of angels to his defense. He simply slipped away from them, unharmed, demonstrating that his meekness was not helplessness, but self-possession. When his enemies took up stones to hurl at him, he did not hurl them back. When one of his own disciples betrayed him with a kiss, he responded not with fury, but with tenderness. And when the soldiers slapped his face, when they pressed a crown of thorns onto his brow, when they nailed him to the rough wood of the cross, He spoke the most astonishing words ever uttered by human lips. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Luke 23:34. Here was omnipotence in chains, not because it lacked the power to break free, but because love held it fast. This is the meekness to which we are called, not a grim, teeth-gritting endurance, but a radical trust that kindness is stronger than violence, that meekness outlasts malice, and that the God who sees in secret will vindicate in the open. The cynic hears the third beatitude, "The meek shall inherit the land," and scoffs. Surely it is the powerful who inherit, the conquerors, the empire builders, the men who seize what they want by force. In a selfish sense, the cynic is right. The powerful do inherit land. But what kind of land do they inherit? A land scorched by ambition and watered with the tears of the oppressed. A land where the soil is soured by greed and the air is thick with pollution. History is littered with the ruins of empires that conquered everything and possessed nothing. Kingdoms that won the world but lost their souls. The meek are wiser. They understand that true inheritance is not measured in acres or armies, but in goodness. The land they inherit is not corrupted by the means of its acquisition. It is a land full of the love of God rather than the hatred of man, a land where kindness dwells and meekness walks the streets like a good neighbor. This promise, we should note, bears a double meaning. It can represent the promised land that awaits the faithful in heaven, that inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, which does not fade away. And it can represent here and now the transformed hearts of those who have been remade by the meekness of Christ, an interior landscape of peace that no conqueror can plunder and no tyrant can confiscate. If the meekness of Christ sometimes seems too exalted for imitation, let us turn to a man who proved it could be lived in the dust and danger of human history. In the year 1219, in the midst of the Fifth Crusade, when Christian and Muslim armies faced each other across blood-soaked fields, a small barefoot friar named Francis of Assisi did something that bewildered both sides. He walked straight into the enemy camp. He carried no weapon. He wore no armor. He bore nothing but a smile and the reckless courage of a man who had taken the meekness of Christ as his rule of life. He asked, with astonishing simplicity, to speak to Sultan Malik al-Kamil himself. Francis did not come with threats or demands. He did not come to debate or to conquer. He came robed in the meekness of his master, and that meekness proved more powerful than any sword in the Crusader arsenal. The Sultan, moved by the little friar's courage and gentleness under fire, granted Francis and his brothers an extraordinary privilege: freedom of movement and protection to preach at the sacred sites of the Holy Land. That single encounter, born of nothing but meekness and love, planted a seed that has borne fruit for more than 800 years. To this day, the Franciscan Brotherhood maintains custody of the holiest sites in the land where Jesus walked. What the armies of Christendom could not secure by force, a barefoot friar obtained by meekness. If that is not proof that the meek shall inherit the land, then I do not know what is. Meekness, then, is not an abstract virtue to be admired from a distance. It is a daily discipline, a way of moving through the world that requires more courage than any act of aggression. How, then, shall we practice it? Here are 4 ways I offer to live by this beatitude. 1. Serve rather than dominate. Jesus knelt and washed the dusty feet of his disciples. If the Lord of the universe could stoop to the posture of a servant, how much more ought we to seek opportunities to serve rather than to lord it over those around us? True greatness, Christ teaches, is found not by exalting yourself, but at the basin and the towel. 2. Respond with patience, not rudeness. Meekness asks us to pause before we react, to choose understanding over anger, and to meet provocation with grace. This does not mean we never speak truth. It means we speak it seasoned with love, remembering that the person who offends us is also someone for whom Christ died. 3. Choose kindness over argument. Saint Francis de Sales, that great apostle of gentleness, wisely observed that you can achieve more with a spoonful of honey than a barrel of vinegar. Kindness disarms in a way that argument never can. It slips past the defenses of the heart and speaks to something deeper than pride. It speaks to the image of God in the other person. 4. Release what you cannot control. Resist the urge to diminish others because you disagree with them. Strive to live peaceably with those whose opinions are different to yours. Do not take yourself too seriously, and above all, entrust to God what lies beyond your power to change. The meek are not passive, they are profoundly free, because they have placed their trust in a power far greater than their own. The third Beatitude presents us with a magnificent paradox. The world says, "Blessed are the aggressive, for they shall seize the land." Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit it." And the difference between seizing and inheriting is everything. To seize is to take by force what does not belong to you. To inherit is to receive lovingly what has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world. The meek do not grab, they receive. They do not conquer, they give, and what they give from what they have received is beyond the imagination of any empire builder. A land renewed by goodness, a heart transformed by grace, and an eternal inheritance that moth cannot corrupt or thieves steal. God bless you, and may the meekness of Christ dwell within you.